Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a special webinar about our current economic outlook. I am Holly Schroeder, the President and CEO of the Santa Clarita Valley Economic Development Corporation. SCVEDC is a public-private partnership focused on job growth, business attraction, and business retention in the Santa Clarita Valley. And we typically do an annual economic outlook every spring that sort of looks ahead and very specifically at the forecast for the Santa Clarita Valley due to the circumstances arising from the coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus, and various orders relating to gatherings and public meetings and such. We needed to cancel that event that was to be held a couple of weeks ago. And so we put together this webinar in order to provide a preliminary look into what the future of the economy might look like. We obviously are anticipating this is a very dynamic situation. A lot of things have been changing in the past 2 weeks, and are likely, what we see is going to continue to change. And therefore, we are planning still to do our actual economic outlook this fall, and so that we can have a look ahead. So we do have a new date for that event in September, so please mark your calendars for that, and more will be coming on that. But the focus of today is to start to give you some information to interpret what is happening around us in the economy. And therefore, I'm going to very quickly here turn the microphone over to Dr. Mark Schniepp, who is our economist that works with the SCVEDC on the forecast that we do each year. And Dr. Schniepp is well-versed in the economy of the Santa Clarita Valley. He has been doing our economic forecast for a decade, and he is, well connected into what is happening here and can drill into that. And today what he's going to do is help us understand and start to interpret what's happening around us, look at a variety of scenarios because there is so much uncertainty with us, what's happening around us, and really hopefully give us tools to move forward. Dr. Schniepp will again be presenting our forecast at the event in September, and that should give us some new perspective as things are hopefully settling out by there. Dr. Schniepp is a graduate of UC Santa Barbara, lives in Santa Barbara, and has expertise in econometrics and regional economic areas, and therefore he's very well poised to do this. So with that, I am going to hand the presentation over to Dr. Schniepp. And Mark, the floor is yours. Oh, before we say that, I just want to do one last thing. There is the opportunity for questions for Dr. Schniepp as he is getting set up here. So in your sidebar, you can expand and contract the sidebar using the orange arrow at the top of the sidebar, and then there is a place for questions. If you submit questions, they're all submitted via chat. I will be the moderator of that and provide those to Dr. Schniepp. So with that, Mark, if you are ready to go, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Holly, and welcome everyone to a very timely, hopefully timely, prepared analysis of the economic update and outlook for the U.S. and California economies right now. I'll also speak a little bit about the Santa Clarita Valley, but mostly what's happening nationwide and statewide. So this presentation is as of March 25th, today. So again, the data should be pretty timely and relevant. Here's what I want to talk about today. What we know so far about the coronavirus and what the status is, what's happening to the U.S. and California economies right now with all the turmoil. How long is the economic damage, or essentially the outlook for 2020? Again, given at least information that we have as of today. And then, of course, the risks that the Santa Clarita Valley may face. All right, this first picture through today is the daily new cases worldwide of the coronavirus. And as you can see, it continues to rise in an exponential fashion on a day-to-day basis. Now, the 25th, that's data as of noon today, so that's not complete. By the end of the day, that'll probably be at a record level. But this is what we're facing right now. This is where we are at the moment, and I'm sure you all know it. Here are 3 countries. Here's Italy as of today, South Korea, and the US. And as you can see, the US is growing at a faster rate than Italy right now. And we'll probably catch Italy in the next few days, since Italy's growth rate seems to be now leveling off. I'll mention that again. But in South Korea, you saw it flatten, and certainly enough, here are the daily cases. This is what we're trying to achieve, a growth rate that goes down to practically zero, a flattening of the curve. When you hear flattening of the curve, this is it. This is what we're trying to emulate. The immediate status of the virus, well, we're in a panic state, needless to say. The growth rate in the US continues to rise. It finally has exceeded the Italian growth rate, and as you know, Italy is completely shut down. It's escalating in Europe, particularly Spain and Germany. However, the epicenter of growth is now in the state of New York. It's abating in South Korea and Singapore, and in China, it's pretty much over. There have been no new internal cases in China over the last 5 days. In fact, you'll see headlines like this. Let me go back there, which was in Forbes magazine just a few days ago, about life returning to normal in China. Already, their economy is ramping up. First, it started slowly, but now it's occurring a lot more quickly. More than 90% of all victims have recovered. The supply chains are being restored slowly, but I read just yesterday that 95% of all enterprises that were shut down are now back in operation in China. Apple has reopened all of its stores in mainland China, and Starbucks reopened in the epicenter of the coronavirus, Wuhan, and claimed they would have 90% of all their stores open by the end of this week. Okay. Now, what you need to know about the US economy so far to put this all in context, pre-virus, there was just not much economic news affecting the 2020 forecast. When we were in February, we were looking at forecasts for 2020, and we thought, hey, this is going to be another boring, continuing economic expansionary forecast in the year 2020. But of course, everything changed, and it kind of changed quickly. The stock market was at record highs. The unemployment rate was at 3.5%. The economy was poised only to slow a little this year to 2% or something like that, down a little bit from 2019. The uncertainty that produced really the cloud over the economy in 2019, that was starting to fade away, especially on January 15th when phase 1 of the China-US trade deal was signed, putting together a lot of agreements regarding trade that had been in dispute. Here's the unemployment rate for the US going all the way back to the 1960s. And here's where we were in February. Okay, we haven't seen a rate that low since the late 1960s, or at least 50 years. So the lowest in a number of generations is where we started this year off. The other thing that was very sort of surprising was to see the housing market roaring back. Here's housing starts in the US through February. We saw cycle highs, business cycle highs in housing starts. Overall in this country, we were seeing more in California too, the highest since 2006, the housing bubble days. And then take a look at this too. Index of leading indicators, which of course gives us information about the likelihood of slower growth and a downturn in the next 6 to 9 months. Well, we actually saw a breakout in this particular index, which is a composite index of many, many types of economic statistics. And it was moving up in January, February faster than it had over the last, say, 12 or 13 months. And again, that was due to lower risks entering into 2020 because the trade war was resolving itself. The stock market was making a whole new high, and manufacturing was starting to come back as a result of the trade deals with Europe, Canada, Mexico, and China. Okay, everything turned quickly. The economy now faces an unprecedented shock, and it all occurred just in the last couple of weeks. You know, I'm getting some ghosts affect my mouse. The coronavirus hit the securities market like a shock wave. Now it's hitting the economy in the same way. Investors originally were spooked over all the uncertainty of containment, but now they're spooked by just not knowing what the extent of the economic damage is going to be. It's just the uncertainty is killing the stock market right now. The Fed first did an emergency 50 basis point cut in the federal funds rate, and then another emergency cut to 0 just within the first couple of weeks in March. And that was done in order to ease credit in a spectacular way during this crisis. Here's the Dow all the way up through today's close, the last 125 days. And we reached a high on February 12th, an all new record high. But since then, it pretty much went straight down in a 19-day period, 33% as of just a couple of days ago on Monday. It has roared back the last couple of days. We'll see if that can hold, but we're still down about 24%, okay, since the high in late February. Let me move to supply and demand issues. Those are the most pressing, of course, for the economy and what the outlook is going to be. And this particular picture shows, the virus as a mine, which is essentially, effectively, I should say, stopping tankers loaded with containers with products coming into the United States. And that has stopped things significantly, which has interrupted supply chains. So first it was the supply issue. And that is, again, containers filled with products for American businesses not coming from China. Travel bans also limiting tourists into the US, so we have no supplies of tourists to spend. Then the forced closures of business, that evolved into a demand shock. The stock market collapse affects household wealth. Consumers aren't therefore spending due to this wealth effect from stock market valuations plummeting, and also from losing their jobs, and also just from the uncertainty about the future, whether they will lose their jobs or just how long this pandemic will continue. So the demand issue is much more troublesome than the supply issue, and policy implications will be different for each. The other issue with demand is tourists just aren't spending. Why? Well, because they're not here and everything is closed anyway. Heavily impacted sectors are going to include, well, are including right now, airlines, hotels, restaurants, retail stores, all spectator entertainment venues, truck drivers, warehouse workers, and now bars, gyms, personal care stores. So it's the magnitude is incredible. The impacts that we can see to date, well, this big decline in the stock market, lots of travel, visitor spending that has just been curtailed entirely. Planes less than half full or not flying at all. Tumbleweeds blowing through hotel lobbies. And then the great shutdown of the coronavirus of public events. I'll talk about this in just a second. The Fed cuts rates to near 0%, and then the flight to safety in the financial market sends long-term interest rates to historical lows as investors, rally the bond market. We're at record lows in interest rates. We haven't seen rates this low going all the way back to the 1780s, when the Continental Congress was floating bonds to try to finance the Revolutionary War. Okay, other impacts? Well, all the initial runs on Costco, Target, all grocery stores for toilet paper, canned goods. Well, you know it. You've been to the store. You can see what you can't buy. And we're seeing continued empty grocery store shelves, even to this day. Empty stores and empty downtowns and no traffic. Longer delivery times from Amazon because they're swamped. Oil prices have tumbled, and oil company stock prices are down 50%, right along with the airline stock values. Okay, here's the benchmark crude oil price for the United States, and here it is over time, going back for about 20 years, nearly 20 years, not quite. And Monday, there's where it ended. Friday to Monday, and real low. This is the lowest level of oil price we've seen, an 18-year low. So correspondingly, you've also seen your gas prices come down quite a bit as well. Now, the shutdown. The shutdown, I'm going to give you a list. You already know most of this, but just seeing all of these things in a list fashion just shows you the spectacular decline of economic activity that is currently present, or maybe I should be terming that non-present, in the American economy right now. The NBA season suspended, March Madness canceled, all California schools closed, pretty much all schools in the United States closed, all high school sporting events suspended, the UC system, all in-person classes canceled. For that matter, most universities now, Disneyland theme parks closed, California, Florida, and then all subsequent parks, New York Broadway shows closed, all Major League Baseball season delayed, all spring training delayed, the Olympics postponed, music festivals like Coachella postponed, other entertainment venues canceled, conventions canceled, conferences canceled or postponed, travel from Asia, Europe, and the US banned. Okay, and then all bars, restaurants, wineries, breweries, you name it, closed. Shelter in place, just recently enacted, now for nearly half of the US when you add up all the states. It's probably going to be going to most of the US, but new states join every day in shelter in place orders. The jobs, therefore, most at risk now in the country are, of course, restaurants and bars. And then most of the retail trade sector, for that matter, except for, of course, grocery stores, amusement and recreation, spectator sports, sporting goods, motor vehicle dealers and motor vehicle parts, all the hotels and all the hotel-related businesses, health and personal care stores and gyms, air, travel, water, transportation, ground transportation, trucking, business and administrative support services, from all the conferences and meetings and business activities which have been canceled. The observed layoffs that we are seeing today are clearly in the airlines and at the airports and in hotels and, of course, restaurants and at all public meeting places, any public gathering place. All staff at sports venues, their suppliers, all the food concessions, fitness centers, salons, layoffs of trucking, warehousing workers due to less products coming in on container from China and from other places, fewer deliveries to restaurants, hotels, and bars. Okay, and the layoffs are occurring because there's just too many closures. There's less to transport, to store, and to deliver right now. And then that's not counting all the people that aren't laid off, but are simply idled from the shelter-in-place mandates all over California, New York, Illinois, Washington, Colorado, and a myriad of other states. Take a look at this. This is just staggering to see this. Here's claims for unemployment insurance, the first time, so it's initial claims. And this is for California, ending just last Friday, and then compiled on Saturday, March 21st. But we saw a spectacular run-up in initial claims, 5 times the level that were claimed the previous week, that were reported the previous week. And that's the peak during the Great Recession of in 2009. So you can see the extent, the context that we're in that we're facing as a result of the pandemic. Here's claims in the US, similar pattern as well. Claims jumped to 680,000 last Friday, and we've never seen anything like that. That's a new record. Claims are supposed to jump again by almost as much this week, so we're watching that statistic very carefully. It's absolutely unbelievable. And here, in the case of the U.S., this is more than triple the claims of the previous week. Now, when I look at consumer sentiment indices, and of course, that would tell me how the consumer is feeling about themselves, their prospects, their job, their income, their spending going forward. The latest index, which was released around March 10th, okay, didn't really show much decline at all. It was only down 6 points, but we know it's coming. So, you know, a lot of the economic statistics to date are not yet showing any effects of the pandemic yet. It's still too early. This has all just happened so rapidly, but you will start to see some very ugly indicators be presented over the next couple of weeks. This reading will collapse and confirm a very bearish sentiment. The observed impacts that we are seeing, well, we're seeing sharp and prolonged declines in consumer spending. They're not occurring because everybody's staying at home. They're being out of work, or the wealth effect is keeping them, you know, very cautious. And also everything's closed, so it's very hard to spend. I've certainly spent on Amazon, but nowhere else, except the grocery store. Most travel and all recreation, all in-store retail goods and services. Can't spend except for food and medicine. Okay, automobiles. Well, you can buy an automobile online if you want. And then larger durable goods like washing machines, refrigerators, dishwashers, things like that. So we're all talking about this because when demand goes down the tubes, what do you have? You normally have a recession because it represents nearly 70% of gross domestic product in this country. A recession occurs if these effects on demand are sustained. Okay, they're severe. We know that. We already know they're severe, but are they prolonged? So we're watching it to see just how long this could be. Okay, and the prolonging or the severity rises with the length of the shutdown deemed necessary for containment of this pandemic. Now, go to Google Trends if you've ever used Google Trends, and you can find out what people are Googling, and that's exactly what I did here. So a lot of times I'll go there and say, okay, what are people Googling, and enter in keywords, and it'll tell me what seems to be a hot topic, what people are concerned about, or what they're interested in. So in this particular case, I got an all-time record high in people Googling the word recession. So it's generally a foregone conclusion that people are very concerned about this now. Look at before just this month. I mean, no one was concerned about recession at all. But now that concern has increased by more than 5, 6, 7 times. So that's a big issue now regarding consumers and their uncertainty about their prospects in view of a coming recession. Additional impacts we will see, well, interruptions of all durable goods supplies. You may not be able to get the things you want, like an iPhone, because those were interrupted with all the shutdowns in China, where a lot of those products are made. Other electronics in China, Hong Kong as well, and farm and industrial equipment of all types. You're going to see some construction delays from interrupted supplies of building materials from China. Developers are telling me they can't get certain stone or block, or they can't obtain hardware and hinges and faucets and things like that for homes. You're going to see big bankruptcies at small and mid-sized businesses, and you're going to see continued shortages at grocery stores. Okay, why is that? Well, because we can't switch the supply chain mechanism from restaurants, bars, cafeterias, student dormitory cafeterias, things like that. We can't switch that over to grocery stores that quickly, because think about it, every 50% of all food consumed in this country is food away from home. Now, 100% of all food is consumed in home. So we have to switch everything over from food away to food to. And that's why the loads can't keep up with the demand at grocery stores right now. Oil and gas facility shutdowns all over the country. Okay, you're going to start seeing more of that and more layoffs in oil and gas extraction workers and all the support crews which facilitate that operation of oil and gas extraction. Now, I've gone through a whole list of things that are certainly impacted in a negative fashion. Are there any benefits? Well, there are. Certainly, there are all the major runs on stores for food and toilet paper, and that's boosting retail food store revenues by twice, if not more. Lower oil prices are a big positive for you as a consumer. The problem with that is there's no place to go. Okay, and actually, when you look at it, because we are the largest producer of oil in the world, this is a negative to the US economy. Actually, it impacts oil revenues, it impacts taxes to state and federal governments, and certainly jobs as well. Amazon is hiring to facilitate the rapid switch to online purchases. Take a look at this headline, this bulletin that came out by MarketWatch just on Saturday. Amazon's hiring 100,000 workers. Walmart, another 150,000. Target is hiring. Here, more. 7-Eleven, 20,000 workers. Kroger, 10,000. Safeway is hiring. CVS announced plans to hire 50,000 nationwide. Pizza Hut, Papa John's, Domino's, they need new delivery drivers badly. And then the healthcare industry is ramping up in overdrive. Healthcare is larger than retail, trade, hospitality, airlines, or recreation. So that's going to be a big boost. To some extent, won't offset certainly what we're seeing going down, but it will provide some offset. Demand for respiratory equipment is generating hiring in manufacturing, medical devices of many types. Stay-at-home workers are creating record surges in internet demand. So Sonic and Cox and Comcast and other ISPs are hiring. And then unrelated to the virus, just I thought I'd put it in here with regard to hiring, is the census. 2020 census, which looks like it's going to be postponed, but nevertheless, it will be hiring 500,000 workers to administer the census this year. And then lower interest rates that we're certainly seeing from the flight to safety in the bond market will ultimately boost the housing market further. And I'll talk about this in a second. And although you may not see too many sales right now because you just can't really preview too many homes, it will stay low. So the housing will certainly be beneficial during the recovery period. It may even lead the recovery period. All right, here's mortgages, and they've tumbled this week. The latest week for the Freddie Mac numbers for conforming loans were down to about 3.7, a little bit lower percent. Okay, it had reached an all-time low of 3.29% the first 10 days of March. And so this is stimulating significant activity in home sales US-wide, at least through February. I'm sure things have been put on respite since then, but you can see that the home market was rising very sharply now into 2020. It's sort of in tandem with housing starts that I showed you earlier. And now that got interrupted. And then the volume of loans for purchases, and this is put out by the Mortgage Bankers Association survey, also reached a cycle peak for purchase loans. But the big one was the refi index, all-time record high because of the all-time record low in mortgage rates that was observed during the first couple of weeks of March. Things have been very chaotic in the mortgage market, however, and a lot of programs have been ended. A lot of lenders will not make more than conforming loans. A lot of lenders won't even make home loans right now because they're worried about the creditworthiness of buyers and the uncertainty of perhaps people refinancing or even buying new, whether they're going to have a job in 30 days. So that's a big issue. Job openings going into January and even February in the US, 7 million openings, 7 million jobs unfilled. And the reason I added this to the benefits is that a lot of the underlying conditions that the economy was in before coronavirus really took hold of everything still should prevail for the most part once we're in recovery. So a lot of these jobs will need to be filled. We have essentially more jobs that need people than we have people needing jobs. Let me talk about California and what's gone on here. Here is a picture of how we've seen job creation, and this is in thousands in California. And last year we created 252,000. That's down, but nevertheless, there's reasons for it being down. And one of them is because there's just nobody left to hire. We have all these job openings too. We reached an all-time low of 3.9% on the unemployment rate. That's the lowest ever observed in the history of California as far as records have been kept. So we're at a more than full employed California, at least prior to March. The economy was very strong and vibrant before the pandemic. We had the lowest unemployment on record. Existing home sales were rising again. And after a respite in prices and even a downturn in some markets in coastal California in 2019, we actually have been seeing prices rally again and rise more sharply as the housing market demand has come back a little bit over the last several months, at least through February. Tourism was surging with a rising share attributed to foreigners coming back, and that included Chinese tourists as well. So tourism was near all-time record highs in terms of numbers. Lodging occupancies at hotels were at record levels. Most of the coastal hotels and motels and Airbnbs in California. Here, just take a look. Here's just an example. Death Valley National Park, total annual visitors. We saw this soaring the last couple of years to all-time record highs on a record that goes all the way back to the 1930s. And this is the same thing at Yosemite and other national and state parks around the state. Here's attendance at Disneyland. And the only reason this isn't continuing to rally is that we've hit capacity constraints through 2019. And it's just hard to get any more people in the park. It's had to close a number of times because of too many visitors. The engines of growth that we're seeing in California right now is the broad-based job creation from all sectors, particularly technology. Okay, we all know it's in the Bay Area, the LA metro regions. That's been a driving force underlying the California economy all the way into this year through February. And then, of course, all of the new development. That has been extraordinary in California. And why? It's because of all the apartment building in the metro areas, a surge in new building of office product and hotels, both in Northern and Southern California. The high-speed rail in Central California has employed more people on it than at any other time. And then, of course, the thousands of fire rebuilds in Northern California. This is keeping the construction industry fully employed like we've never seen it before. Okay, and here is the picture of investment dollars going into new commercial and industrial structures in California. All-time record highs, 2018, 2019. Unemployment rate for construction workers in the US is the lowest it has ever been since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started tracking unemployment rates by sector, which was in the late 90s. So we've never seen one this tight. Here is coronavirus cases in California, and I've monitored the Bay Area and Southern California through today. This is through today at noon. That's why you see them kind of turn down. We don't have a full day in yet, but it's still growing exponentially in California. However, California is doing substantially better than, say, New York. California, needs to say, is larger than New York State, but California has 2,753 cases as of today at noon, and yet New York State had 30,811, or nearly more than 10 times as many in California. So again, California, because of the shutdown by Governor Newsom, shelter in place starting on the 15th for the Bay Area and then later extended to the rest of the state, I think has really slowed down the overall growth rate. We're still having too many cases, however, and so we're watching to see how that curve flattens and how soon it will. Who's impacted in California? Well, here, all restaurants, bars, wineries, breweries, any public gathering place. The order for shelter, March 15th, and then extended on the 19th for the rest of California. Only, quotes, the essential critical infrastructure workforce can remain at work. How many people are impacted in view of that order? Well, we did an accounting of this, a thorough industry by industry accounting to see who is critical, who is part of this critical infrastructure and who is not, so that we could get at least some idea of what jobs are at risk. And so we went to the essential workforce guidelines that were put out by the governor's office, public health, on Saturday, and looked at industry by industry. And here's what the impact of the pandemic shelter in place orders for California yield. Okay, so the essential jobs really make up 11.8 million jobs in California out of a total jobs of about 17.8 million. And then non-essential, but these people can work from home easily, is about 1 million jobs can work from home. So that you add the two together and you get 12.7 million that total jobs that are operational, okay, that can go to work. Now, whether, you know, governments, which are essential, and other larger companies actually have everybody go to work is another story. They still may have them work from home. So that work from home bar could be a little bit longer, but nevertheless, these are the total jobs that can remain operational due to the essential critical infrastructure workforce guidelines. But that leaves at risk 5 million jobs in the state that could potentially be laid off. Not likely to be, but that's what's at risk. And here they are. These are the ones. Mostly it's going to be in restaurants and hotels, and then retail stores that are non-food, non-medicine, and then administrative support, supporting businesses in general. Those are the big three, and those are large industries. You can see how many people, this bar represents how many people are in those industries now as of February. Okay, so these are big sectors that will be impacted. Here's employment and air transportation, not as big. We have less than 60,000 in California. We believe about half of these will be impacted, but this is small compared to the other industries that I just showed you. How long is the damage and what will it be? Well, this is how it kind of goes. The current extent and expected length of the damage is really driven by the public health officials and how they see this issue. Tell me how long until containment is achieved, and for how long we're going to be staying at home, and I'll give you a reasonable assessment of the damage. So it really is unknown. Right now, it's just speculation based on our own assumptions of the great pandemic shutdown. So that's what I want to do next. I want to give you some scenarios as we forecast really this year's outlook based on a variety of scenarios, and of course answer the question, are we in a recession right now? Well, many people have tried to answer this, at least forecast it. So here's from the leading several investment banks or Wall Street firms, and also UCLA in their forecasts of the US economy, particularly for Q2. That's the one I've zeroed in on here. So JP Morgan Chase has GDP down 3% in Q2. Deutsche Bank, 13%. IHS Markit, negative 8.3%. They're all down, of course. UCLA Anderson forecast, who I work with, is negative 6.4%. And I can tell you they made that forecast early in the month of March before shelter in place orders were in operation. I'm sure they had to do that again. That negative may be double digits. UBS down 10% with 7% unemployment rate. Remember, the unemployment rate is 3.5 now, so it would double. Goldman Sachs down 24%, staggering amount from Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America down 12% with 1 million jobs lost alone in Q2. So that's what we're seeing coming out most recently through March 20th for the immediate forecasts of the U.S. economy. Here's the ones that we are assuming, and we had to come up with our own scenarios. So the first scenario that we came up with about 8 days ago was, okay, Corona appears contained by, say, mid-April, okay, with much fewer daily case outbreaks. Supply chains restored by the end of the month. Travel bans lifted in early May. Spectator events resume in May, and people rush to plan their summer travel. And demand all comes back by the summer, certainly in June and parts of May. Well, we kind of X this one out. I hate to X it out because I'd certainly like to believe this is the one, but we don't know. We think that this may be too optimistic. However, the president keeps saying that he wants to put Americans back by April 12th or Easter time. So not that this is entirely impossible, but it's probably less probable. So my new optimistic scenario is this one. The pandemic peaks in late April with containment achieved by late May. Okay, shelter-in-place orders removed in May, and airlines, other travel, all events restored by June. All right, this seems a little more reasonable, but it is optimistic compared to my pessimistic scenario, which would be the pandemic peaks June 1st, containment by the end of June, restoration of the economy by August 1st. Certainly under this scenario, we are definitely going to have negative GDP growth in Q2 and perhaps even Q3 of this year. And it should be known that just the decline in the stock market alone that we've seen will reduce GDP probably by about 100 basis points, if nothing else, because of the wealth effect, the dashing of the demand, and the evaporation of trillions of dollars of valuation. All right, let me show you how this looks in pictures. A picture tells a lot more than just words. So here's GDP growth in the US quarterly, and everything to the right of this dotted line becomes a forecast. Now we are right here, we're in the forecast area because the first quarter, that's first quarter there, is not yet over. So it's over in about 5-6 days from now, and then I'll be able to move that line. But whatever the case may be, we're there, and this is the optimistic scenario for GDP. That's the pessimistic scenario. So under the optimistic scenario, we go down about 3%. All right, remember, it's basically just April, which means that the months of May and June salvage the quarter and don't make it as much of a bloodbath as it could end up being under the pessimistic scenario here, where GDP goes down the full 9-10% for the entire quarter. So this is the extent of the damage that we would be predicting based on the current shut-in that is in place in California and, for the most part, much of the rest of the country. You can see that the recovery is very sharp, and so there is a big move upward, and we're back in positive growth pretty quickly. I'll talk about that more as we move on here. Here's the unemployment rate. Under either scenario, it rises very sharply under the optimistic or pessimistic. And again, if you were to go to my first optimistic scenario, then it would look like this, but only for the month of April. This is for the entire quarter. So the pessimistic scenario has unemployment elevated for a few quarters, even going into 2021. But it does come down. And in fact, in both cases, it is coming down pretty rapidly. The reason it doesn't go all the way back to where it was is because there will be victims from this. There will be bankrupt businesses. There will be people that won't come back to work. There will be a slow ramp up, and I'll talk about the ramp up effect very shortly. So here's the summary for the US. We have two principal scenarios, optimistic and pessimistic. And even if the shutdown was called off on April 1st, which would be, next week, there would still be much slower growth in, of course, March and April. There are serious supply limitations. and the attendant decline in demand that comes with that. It comes with the consumer workers losing their jobs, income, and wealth. I mean, this is just staggering under most of these scenarios. It's clearly a mega contraction in the economy. The question is it a recession? And the definition of a recession is, well, it has to be something that affects the economy that is sudden, which this is, and it is significant, which this is, and it is prolonged. Well, again, we don't know how prolonged this is going to be. That's really going to be up to the National Bureau of Economic Research to call whether it's a recession or not, because they're the organization that makes that determination based on the extent of idle resources, labor and capital and factories and everything in the economy. Because the shutdown is just unprecedented and severe, it's likely that they'll call one beginning now and continuing until the contraction is clearly over. However, a recession could still be averted. You know, if we ramp up enough in May and June to overcome and offset the bloodbath that's going to be impacting, well, we're going to see it impacting March, it already has, and likely most of April. So that's sort of the nuances, the semantics associated with calling this a recession. But so what I'm calling it right now is just a severe and unknown lengthy contraction in the US economy. Okay, because interest rates will remain low through 2020, this will help boost housing, okay, and to perhaps even lead the recovery. Inflation remains a non-issue. In fact, we could even go into some deflation. Construction, which there's a lot of right now, you know it, I know it, everyone knows it, is going to be less impacted by the supply chain and will also help to power back the regional economies once we are in recovery. The layoffs are going to persist from right now for probably up to 6 weeks, and at the worst case, 4 months. And that's, of course, going to push the unemployment rate into very ugly territory. So don't be surprised when you see those statistics be released by the media. Okay, for California, workers in transportation and in the retail sector and in the hospitality sector, I've already talked about them being impacted. Layoffs, furloughs, suspensions. We've talked about them affecting up to 5 million workers. We don't think all 5 million will be laid off. Many will be furloughed. Many of them will be kept on the books of these companies. There will be some suspended work. Hours will be reduced. There'll be a variety of creative ways. And in view of the bailout package that is here or soon to be here, it will give a lot of employers a stimulus to maintain these workers on the books and even give them some part-time work if possible. The logistics jobs, that is moving stuff and storing stuff in warehouses and things like that, will be in decline, but less severely, and it'll probably come back first as containers come in from China start arriving. But there will still be product delays during the second quarter. Unemployment rises to near 7% under the pessimistic scenario, and it'll reach that by the end of 2020. Here's a picture of how this looks. Here's the optimistic scenario. We lose during the first quarter up to about 500,000 jobs in California. That's not 5 million, but it's probably in April close to 1.5 million. It's just that under the optimistic scenario, May and June average everything back up when workers come back to work. So the quarter on average loses 500,000, but it will look uglier during April. I'll tell you that. And then we have a rapid return in the third quarter. Pessimistic scenario, well, that is even worse. We could be down 1 million jobs in the second quarter of this year because, of course, the containment is, the assumption is the containment persists into and throughout the second quarter into the third. But again, a rapid recovery in job creation once things become back under control and the pandemic ends. Unemployment rates, right now, they're not going to show much effect in the first quarter. And the reason for that is that The unemployment rate survey is taken during the first 12 days of March. Well, the first 12 days of March didn't have restaurants shut down and shelter in place in order. So it's going to be artificially low. So don't look for unemployment to spike when that's released in April. But it will during the second quarter significantly, both under the optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. Then it will start to abate much more quickly after the second quarter. Pessimistic stays high longer. There's more damage to the economy, and you just have more persistent, lingering effects negatively impacting the unemployment rate over time. So we want to kind of avoid the pessimistic scenario as much as we can, because it has much more negative implications for longer term recovery. Here's the good news, if you want to call it good news. We have this rescue package that's being hopefully passed as I speak. The deal was made just last night, $2 trillion, unprecedented in size and scope, $1,200 in helicopter money to most adults, again, based on criteria of income. But each adult receives $1,200 if they're 75,000 or under in adjusted gross income last year. $367 billion in loans to small businesses. Okay, that's going to help significantly, and $500 billion, another $500 billion to distressed companies. So getting low interest rate and hopefully quickly negotiated loans out to businesses is going to help them to keep employees on and maintain themselves, their viability, and keep these bankruptcies from happening, which would cause a persistently negative economic effect throughout the year. We don't want that to happen. $500 billion in loans to cities and states. The cities are going to be trounced. You know, when you switch all of the food purchases from away from home in restaurants, which are taxed, to grocery stores, which are not taxed, cities lose out big on sales taxes. When you close down all car dealers, cities lose out. When you close down all hotels, or you don't have to close the hotels, just the demand isn't there, then all the bed taxes. So cities are going to have a precipitous decline in revenues, states as well. Then the stimulus package calls for 600 additional week benefit from the federal government for those filing claims for unemployment. That's a big surge. We talk about this in our update, our coronavirus updates that we put on our website. I'll talk to you more about that in a second. And $130 billion going to hospitals to help support the run on hospitals that is anticipated. More good news. Well, recessions normally resemble U-shaped movements in the business cycle as opposed to V-shaped. We don't want a U-shape. We don't want to be floundering and bumping along the bottom very long. That creates a lot more misery. We would certainly prefer a V-shape if we're going to have a recession at all, where we go down sharply and we recover sharply. We believe that this recession is going to be like that, but except the V-shape is going to be a lot more steep on both ends. However, the longer the pandemic goes, the less steep on the right side are we going to see the recovery. I'll talk about that next. Potential delays. A V-shaped recovery does not mean immediately. Okay, the economy is like an ecosystem. It ramps up from this devastation, and that ramping up could take as long as 6 months, maybe even longer. Can prior airline itineraries be reestablished quickly once airlines are given the go? Can that happen? Can the converted supply chains be reconverted back quickly from trucking to grocery stores and to Costco to trucking back to Red Lobster and other chain restaurants, just all restaurants? Can that be switched? You can see how long it's taking the supply chain to switch to grocery stores. That's why you have empty shelves. So it's going to take a while to go back the other way. Here, supply chains need to be restored from China. And will our network here, of purchasers of Chinese supplies and intermediate goods, be able to reabsorb the surge in inbound products and to distribution centers. Will that occur? We don't know. Again, that really depends on the length of time that we are out of business and that things are shut down. And then what about the demand? We have to establish worker supply chains internally. Will everyone be available to return to their old job? Okay. And, or will, in other words, will they like their new job if they got one at Walmart or Costco or Target or, in the hospitals? Will they like that one better? And therefore, businesses that return won't have the same workforce opportunities. Will there be delays due to any lingering worker quarantines when we start to rise again, like we saw in China? That's one of the reasons China was so slow to start up again, is they still had millions of people in quarantine, couldn't get them into the factories. Okay, can construction projects resume seamlessly? And the reason I put this here is because all the new projects with plans to start in Q3 and Q4 of this year, were they delayed at all by stay-at-home workers now? We don't know. So hopefully construction projects planned for the second half of this year are being planned and there can be a seamless start, but we don't know. And that's true of other industries as well. What about supply and demand coming from small and medium-sized businesses that were forced to quit during the shutdown? That's all going to be gone if they're not salvaged. Okay, so hopefully the stimulus package will be effective, will effectively save most businesses so that their demand will be restored when we come back. And that, again, leads us to a more seamless recovery. I certainly expect 2 to 3 months to have some form of normality once we're giving the green light, but full efficiency probably won't occur for 6 to 9 months, so by the end of the year. So 2020 is going to be a dubious year in the record books for the US economy. Okay, let me address Santa Clarita Valley really quickly. I'm actually going a little bit over time, but stay with me and I'll take your questions here. Really quickly, how is it impacted? I'll go through this quickly. Okay, the largest employer, of course, is shut down. Princess Cruises is shut down. Henry Mayo and College of the Canyons are in the essential workforce. Probably College of the Canyons has a lot of workers at home. The education system just generally does, but nevertheless, they're likely not laid off. Manufacturing enterprises are mostly essential in the Santa Clarita Valley, so they're exempt from shelter in place. That's good news. Okay, less traffic, of course, you're seeing. City will incur significant losses of sales taxes, bed taxes, parking fees, film revenues. Retail and recreation sectors, of course, just like every place else, is suffering the largest impacts. The warehousing for e-commerce is benefiting because we're filling up those warehouses with lots of products for delivery as a result of all the online buying. Because new development was a meaningful engine of current growth, this interruption is especially significant if it does occur. But we know that construction is part of the essential critical infrastructure workforce. In fact, this is the exact language out of the document. Construction workers who support any operation are exempt from shelter in place. So we've done an accounting of the sectors which are most at risk and the dollar loss here. So about 33,500 workers are at risk from the shutdown in the Santa Clarita Valley. About a third of the workers, 62,000 are not. So a third at risk. And then these would be very similar to California. Most of it is going to be in retail and restaurants, administrative support. Okay, and then the arts, entertainment, and recreation. And then when I look at the income impact, it's on an annual basis, it comes out to about $1.3 billion, which represents about 27% of all payroll income in the Santa Clarita Valley. That comes out to about $108 million a month. So if you're down for 2 months, there is a potential at risk of losing $200 million in the Santa Clarita Valley or something like that. We don't think that it would be that much because at-risk employees don't necessarily mean laid off and unpaid, but they are in those categories which do pose a risk for being laid off. Okay, for economic updates regarding the coronavirus, please go to my website and then click on COVID-19 updates, and we regularly give economic information. They're only about 800-900 words, so it's quick to read. To follow this and its economic implications. That's my presentation on the impact of the pandemic. Oh, thank you for watching. Holly, I'm turning it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. We do have some questions, and we have maybe 10 minutes or so left. So let me go through a handful of them. Let's talk a little bit about manufacturing, a few questions on this. One is, we hear a lot in the news about shortages in, personal protective equipment and other related things that our healthcare system needs. What do you think is the capacity of the U.S. economy to respond on that, U.S. businesses to respond on that? And then how do you think that relates to sort of a macro trend of potential onshoring of manufacturing?
Yeah, a commonly asked question among the talking heads on the nighttime programs that you see on TV constantly. Well, there's so many companies now trying to make the masks, trying to make all this stuff, including, Hanes underwear. So they're slowly converting the factories over. I think that there's going to be enough capacity to do that. It's amazing and very encouraging how much the private sector has, stepped up to help this effort, this war that we're facing against the pandemic. So yes, I think that can definitely occur, and I think you're going to see a lot more masks and ventilators be produced in the next week or so. It can happen that quickly, and that's going to certainly help to overwhelm the potential, help the potentially overwhelmed hospitals that could occur. Certainly, probably are occurring in New York. I don't know if they're occurring elsewhere, and it's likely that there'll be bills in Congress coming forward after this all settles down, which is going to give bigger incentives to American companies to relocate, critical components of public health to back to the U.S. So look for those kind of incentives, tax incentives of all types in order to relocate that, because that is a huge talking point that we've been seeing lately.
So Mark, what about consumer? I mean, we're obviously largely a consumer-driven economy. What about the consumer confidence factors? So how have you factored into your scenarios, and what do you think about how quickly consumer confidence is restored and people get back to business as usual, as much as that exists? And the idea of the helicopter money that could come out of this relief bill, how does that factor into both consumer confidence and your scenarios?
Well, we look at consumer confidence very carefully because it's so positively correlated with spending. So if that goes down, spending goes down, and conversely. So we're watching that, and can it be restored once the pandemic fades? Yes, it can, and it can be restored probably pretty quickly. But there will be some hesitancy on the part of consumers to go all the way back up to where they were. They'll still have questions like, can the coronavirus reemerge? There are questions now about when school resumes. If the pandemic is over, when school resumes in September, could this produce another, flare up of the virus? And then what are we going to do then? Hopefully we have a vaccine by then or something. For the most part, hopefully we're not going to see that, and consumers will feel a lot better once things get taken care of. But I think, on one hand, I think consumer confidence could come back strongly, and so could spending. But on the other hand, it depends on how much damage has been done, how long this goes, how much of your depleted savings occurred, whether you were evicted, you know, whether you have your same job back because your employer went out of business. There's all those things that could occur. And how much does the stock market come back? Has your 401k been restored? Has your retirement savings, your IRA, been restored so that you'll feel better about spending? So all of those things are still unknowns, but so we've got to watch for that. Again, the faster we come back, the faster we can restore.
I keep kind of bundling a handful of questions. Moving on to governmental budgets. You talked a little bit about, you know, how cities get hit. What are your thoughts around, you know, state budgets? And then, of course, the big question, the multi-trillion-dollar question is the relief bill. How does that, you know, what's the trade-offs that we should be thinking about of that bill versus impact to deficit and government spending and those other types of, you know, traditional concerns?
Well, certainly the states are going to be impacted significantly, just like the cities. Everybody's going to be impacted. I mean, it's not like the states or the federal government is going to be impacted more than the private sector. Private sector is probably going to certainly feel the brunt. States will be impacted because all the sales tax revenues, all the personal income taxes, that's certainly the case for the state of California. They rely heavily on personal income tax. Well, income's been dashed, and they rely on capital gains from stock market. Well, stock market's been dashed. So those two huge components of revenues for the state, they're gonna suffer immeasurably from that. And of course, I talked about the cities. The federal government, well, this $2 trillion bill, if you look at it, at least the way I saw it last night and this morning, about half of it is loans. So it's only really 1 trillion because theoretically, businesses would pay that all back over time with some interest. It depends on what kind of interest rate they're going to charge. Maybe it's a no interest loan, but we don't know those details yet. But probably with some interest, and it'll all get paid back. So it only becomes 1 trillion. That still doesn't help. I mean, that's still a big hit on the federal debt, the federal deficit. So it does run it up, and we're all going to have to pay for that going downstream. That's why I'm not really big on helicopter money. I feel better about providing a little bit higher amounts for the unemployment insurance because we know those are going to be going to people that were laid off and they have to maintain some form of consumption to pay their rent and to feed their families. But to give $1,200 out to everybody, I don't know. I don't know what kind of incentive that is really going to provide people in the long run for trying to make their own personal arrangements against future uncertainties like this if they can rely on government bailouts going forward. I don't think I like that kind of an incentive, but it will in this particular case provide spending stimulus, and hopefully these people getting it will use it for food and for rent and not save it, scroll it away, or buy other things which really won't help them maintain their livelihood. So again, the stimulus package as I see, I like all components of it so far, except I don't particularly care for the helicopter component.
So real quickly, Mark, you did some forecasting and talked about housing. Do you see this triggering a wave of foreclosures, depression in housing prices? Just, you know, real quickly in terms of your thoughts on that.
Well, it depends on how long it lasts. I think that if this is shorter term and it's just April and May, no, I think the economy has the capacity to absorb that kind of delay. I think there's a lot of efforts in place to prevent any kind of foreclosures. I think there actually is a mandate from the federal government to prevent foreclosures for the next so many days. And there's heavy leaning on landlords to evict renters as well. So I think the housing market should hold up okay if it could just sustain the shutdown period, because with interest rates being this low, and they'll probably remain very, very low, it will it will help affordability, and it will enable many people to refinance, which they need to do, and that will lower, of course, their housing payments, which will free up money for them to spend on other things. So the housing market could become a big boost to the economy. I don't think that it will it will go down much. Under a worst case scenario, I think I saw some forecasts that had prices declining at most 10%. I mean, that's not much. And sales going down by about 20%, but they'll come right back because basically it's just a postpone. I think people will start thinking about that much more in the summertime. So no, I think housing is the least really of our worries right now. I think we need to worry simply about the labor markets and who loses their livelihood there.
Great. I don't think I got to every question, although I got to a vast majority of them. I have on the screen now some of SCVEDC's social media channels. I trust that everybody on here is on our email list, and that's probably how many of you found out about this. If you are not, please contact us. We will be posting this webinar to our YouTube channel, and hopefully, Mark, you'll allow me to share the slides. We've had many requests about that. We do have a resource page on our website, scvedc.org/coronavirus, where we are trying to post all policy changes that are happening. And again, I want to thank everybody for sitting in on this webinar. We will be in touch about whether we're going to do another update like this with Dr. Schniepp in the weeks that come, the months that come, depending on how things unfold. So thank you again for all your work here in the Santa Clarita Valley. Please, everybody, stay healthy, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.